From the moment she opened her eyes each morning, the girl felt the weight of her world long before she even stepped out of bed. The small room she shared with her mother had thin walls, peeling corners, and a window that barely kept out the cold air during winter. But despite these things, she always found a reason to smile. Most of the time, that reason was music. Even before she could speak full sentences, she would tap her fingers on anything she found. Tables, cupboards, the side of her mother's old sewing machine, pretending she was playing a piano. Her mother often said she had music living inside her, and the girl believed that too. They lived in a tiny house at the edge of town, where the street was narrow and the shops were old. Her mother worked long hours at a local tailor shop, stitching clothes for people who never bothered to ask how she was doing. But even with that busy life, she found time every evening to sit with her daughter and listen to her hum or tap out rhythms on the kitchen counter. There was something calming about those moments. It felt like music made their home warmer and lighter, even when the days felt heavy. The girl didn't have a real piano. In fact, her family could hardly afford basic things. But one day, when she was about 10, her mother came home carrying a large cardboard box. Her face was tired, but she still had a little spark of excitement in her eyes. Inside the box was an old, slightly broken keyboard she had bought from a thrift shop. Some keys didn't work, and the sound was far from perfect, but to the girl it felt like treasure. She spent hours sitting on the floor, testing each key, learning which ones worked and which ones didn't. She memorized the sounds, even the strange buzzing noises. She didn't let the broken keys bother her. She told herself that one day she would play on a real piano, one that didn't crackle or beep. She didn't know how or when, but she carried that belief quietly in her heart. Her afternoons were usually spent practicing on that old keyboard. She played in short bursts because the wires heated up if she used it for too long. She didn't have proper lessons, so she learned by watching short videos when the internet worked, or by listening to recordings she found online. Sometimes she slowed the music down, listening again and again, trying to understand each note. Other times she let her fingers move freely, playing whatever came into her mind. Her mother often paused on her way to the kitchen, watching with a soft smile, wondering where her daughter found the strength to dream in a place where dreams didn't come easily. In school, the girl was quiet. She wasn't the type to draw attention, mostly because she didn't have new shoes or colorful bags like the other kids. Her lunch was always simple, sometimes just bread and jam. She didn't complain, but she noticed the differences. She noticed the looks. Children can sense these things, even when no one says anything directly. But music changed everything for her. When she played, she didn't feel poor. She didn't feel small or out of place. She didn't feel like someone who had to shrink or hide. She felt strong and free, like she was stepping into a world only she could see. A world where sound and emotion painted pictures no one could take away from her. One afternoon, as she practiced in the living room, she heard a soft knock on the door. It was the neighbor from across the street, an older woman who often saw the girl sitting outside humming to herself. The neighbor had overheard her practicing through the thin walls and stopped by to ask if she would be willing to play a short piece at a small community event happening at the local hall. The girl didn't know what to say. She had never played in front of strangers before. Her hands turned cold just thinking about it. But her mother gently placed a hand on her back and said, "You should try. You never know who might hear you." That night, the girl practiced twice as long as usual. She rehearsed one piece over and over, making sure her fingers remembered every movement. She knew her keyboard sounded nothing like a real piano, but she hoped her emotion would make up for it. She hoped the people listening would feel at least a small part of what she felt when she played. The day of the community event arrived quickly. The hall was simple, with plastic chairs and a stage that had a few loose boards. But for the girl, it felt like the biggest place she had ever stood in. Her heart raced as she walked up to the keyboard set on stage. It wasn't as old as hers at home, and the sound was smoother. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. When she began to play, her nerves slowly faded. The notes came out gently at first, then stronger, as though they carried her thoughts with them. The small audience watched quietly, surprised by the emotion coming from such a shy girl. Some closed their eyes. Some smiled softly. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before the applause started. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it was warm enough to make her eyes shine. After the event, a local music teacher approached her and asked where she learned to play. When the girl told him she had no formal lessons, only her mother's support and an old keyboard, the teacher looked at her with amazement. He said she had natural talent, real talent. He encouraged her to apply for a scholarship to an elite music academy in the city. The academy was known for having some of the most skilled young musicians. Most students came from wealthy families, and the place itself felt worlds away from her simple home. Still, the teacher insisted she try. He even offered to help her prepare the application. The girl didn't know how to react. The thought of entering a place that grand scared her. What if she didn't belong? What if they laughed at her? But her mother told her something she never forgot. Dreams don't knock twice. If one comes to your door, open it. So the girl practiced harder than ever. She borrowed books from the teacher, watched training videos, and worked on her posture and technique. She even learned basic music theory by reading old photocopies the teacher gave her. Every day after school, she walked to the teacher's small studio and practiced on a real piano for 1 hour. The first time she pressed the keys of that piano, she almost cried. The richness of the sound felt like stepping into a story she had only imagined. Weeks later, she submitted her application, along with a video recording of her performance. She didn't expect anything. She told herself that even applying was a big step. But then, one afternoon, she received an email from the academy. She stared at the screen, unable to move. Her mother stood beside her, worried by her silence. "You got in?" her mother whispered. The girl nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. She had been accepted with a partial scholarship. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to give her a chance. That night, they celebrated with a simple home-cooked meal. Her mother hugged her tightly and said, "This is only the beginning," and the girl believed it. She didn't know what waited for her at the academy. She didn't know that stepping into that world meant facing things much harder than broken keys or shaky nerves. She didn't know that some people there would judge her before she even played a single note. But she didn't know any of that yet. For now, she only knew one thing. She had been given a chance. A small, shining door opening into a bigger world. And even though she felt nervous, she promised herself she would walk through it, holding her dream tightly in both hands. The morning she arrived at the music academy felt unreal. She stood in front of the tall gates with her old backpack and the same worn-out keyboard case her mother had carefully stitched on the sides to stop it from tearing. The academy building stood high and polished, with glass windows that reflected the sun so brightly she had to blink several times. Everything about the place felt expensive, from the clean pavement to the neatly trimmed plants along the walkway. She felt small, as if she had stepped into a different world, one that wasn't built for someone like her. Her heart beat faster as she pushed the heavy doors open. Inside, the halls were wide, decorated with shiny trophies and large framed photos of past winners. Every corner seemed to whisper stories of students who came from families far more fortunate than hers. Students in stylish clothes walked confidently, chatting in groups, dragging brand new instrument cases behind them. Some wore gold badges that showed their years of achievement. She held her old keyboard case tightly, hoping no one would look too closely at it. She walked slowly down the hallway, reading signs until she found the room where new students were supposed to check in. As she entered, a few students looked at her. Their eyes moved from her faded shoes to her simple dress, then to her old keyboard case. She tried to pretend she didn't notice, but she felt the sting of their stares. When the instructor handed her the schedule and map of the academy, she thanked him softly and stepped aside. She stood by the wall, studying the map, trying to understand where each room was. The place was so big it felt like a maze. As she traced her finger along the printed pathways, she overheard a couple of students talking behind her. "Who brings an old keyboard to a place like this?" one whispered, not bothering to lower their voice enough. "It looks like it survived a storm," another said, and they both laughed softly. Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment, but she didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the map, pretending she didn't hear a thing. She reminded herself why she was there. She wasn't there to impress them with clothes or instruments. She was there to play, to learn, to grow. Her first class of the day was theory class. She walked in quietly and sat in the last row, hoping to blend in. The seats around her filled with students flipping through notebooks, discussing past lessons they had studied in other private schools. The girl tried to follow, but most of the terms they used were new to her. She pulled out her old notebook, ready to take notes. When the instructor began the lesson, she listened carefully, writing down everything. She knew she had to work twice as hard to keep up. Every few minutes, the instructor asked a question, and several hands shot up quickly. She didn't raise her hand. She wasn't confident yet. She needed to learn, and she didn't want to embarrass herself by saying something wrong. During break time, she stayed in her seat while others left in groups. A few students passed by her, glancing at her notebook, which had worn out edges and a cover that had faded from years of use. One student looked at it and smiled in a way that wasn't friendly. "Old school notebook," he said in a joking tone as he walked away. She closed her notebook gently, as if protecting it. She reminded herself that she had worked very hard just to be in that room. That alone was something no one could take from her. After theory class, she headed to the practice rooms. It was her favorite part of the day, though she didn't know yet if she would actually get to practice in peace. The hallway leading to the practice area was lined with small rooms, each containing a piano. She checked the schedule and found the room assigned to her. When she opened the door, she froze for a moment. The piano inside was beautiful, shiny, well-polished, and far more elegant than anything she had ever touched. She placed her keyboard case in the corner and sat on the bench. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the first key. The sound filled the room, warm and rich. She closed her eyes and let the feeling wash over her. For a few moments, she forgot everything. The stares, the whispers, the nervousness. This was the one place where she felt safe. But her peace didn't last long. As she practiced, she heard footsteps stop outside her door. A group of students peeked in through the small glass window. One of them pushed the door open slightly. "So you're the new scholarship kid?" a boy said with a smirk. She didn't answer. She kept her hands on the keys, staring down. "I saw your case," another girl added. "Is that really what you use to practice at home?" They laughed softly, not loudly enough to get in trouble, but enough for her to feel their mockery. She wanted to hide, but she didn't move. Instead, she took a deep breath and returned her fingers to the keys. She played again, ignoring the way they stared at her as though she were doing something unusual. The students eventually left, and she was alone again. But the room felt different now, heavier. Her hands shook, not from nervousness but from the quiet ache she couldn't explain. She reminded herself of her mother's words, "Dreams don't knock twice." She wiped her eyes quickly and continued practicing, telling herself she wouldn't let anyone break her spirit. That evening, during the academy's welcome session, students gathered in a large hall. The director gave a speech about discipline, passion, and excellence. She listened carefully, inspired by the director's words about how talent can come from anywhere, and how the academy believes in giving opportunities to deserving students. But even as she listened, she could feel a few eyes on her. When she turned slightly, she saw some students whispering. One of them pointed at her shoes, which were old and slightly uneven at the back. They didn't speak loud enough for others to notice, but their expressions told her everything. She didn't understand why her appearance bothered them so much. She didn't choose to come from a simple home. She didn't choose to live a life where clothes were reused until the fabric thinned. She was just trying to follow her dream, trying to learn something she loved. After the session, the students headed to the dining area. The food was far better than anything she had at home. She picked a simple meal and went to sit alone. The hall buzzed with conversations. Everyone seemed to know someone. Everyone seemed to belong. She ate quietly, keeping her eyes on her plate. A few students walked past her table. She heard one whisper, "Does she ever talk?" Another replied, "Probably not. People like her stay quiet." She didn't react. She just kept eating. Her mother always said, "Silence is stronger than anger." She held on to that thought. When she returned home that night, her mother asked how the first day went. She didn't tell her about the laughter or the looks. Instead, she said, "The pianos are beautiful," and her mother smiled. The next day at the academy was no easier. She arrived early for her practice session, determined to improve. When she reached the room, she saw someone had stuck a small note on her keyboard case. She pulled it off slowly. It said, "Fix your case. It looks like trash." Her chest tightened. She held the note between her fingers for a moment before folding it and placing it in her pocket. She knew if she cried, it would only make things harder. So she took a deep breath and opened the piano lid, choosing to focus on the one thing that made sense to her, music. As she played, she reminded herself that she wasn't there to fit in. She wasn't there to impress anyone with how she looked or what she owned. She was there to fight for her dream, to rise above the things trying to pull her down. She didn't know it yet, but every difficult moment she faced was slowly shaping her into the person she needed to become. The stares, the whispers, the silent mockery. They were all part of the journey that would one day lead her to a stage where those same people would see her differently. For now, she played with all her heart, filling the room with notes that carried her courage, her pain, and her hope. She didn't know what the future held, but she was determined not to break. Not now. Not ever. The days at the academy slowly turned into weeks, and even though the girl faced small hurts almost every day, she refused to give up. Something inside her kept pushing her forward. Maybe it was the memory of her mother's tired smile, or the sound of that old keyboard at home, or the thought of how hard she had worked to earn her place. Whatever it was, it kept her steady even when the surroundings felt unfriendly. Every morning she arrived earlier than most students. The hallways were quiet at that hour, and the practice rooms were empty. She loved those moments because no one was watching her. No one was whispering. No one was judging the way she held her bag or the way her clothes looked. She had the piano all to herself, and she felt like it welcomed her. She began practicing a new piece that her instructor had suggested. At first, it felt too difficult. The notes jumped across the page like a language she didn't fully understand. But she kept trying. She broke the piece into small parts, repeating each section again and again until her fingers learned the path. Sometimes she practiced until her shoulders ached, but she didn't stop. She told herself that every extra hour she put in would help her prove she deserved to be there. One afternoon, as she was practicing, the door opened and a student stepped inside. She recognized him as one of the most skilled pianists in the academy, someone who often got praised for his performances. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her silently. For a moment she wondered if he was there to make fun of her again. But he didn't say anything. He just listened. When she finished the section she had been working on, he nodded slightly and said, "You're improving." She blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected any kindness from him. Before she could respond, he added, "But the competition coming up is tough. You know that, right?" She nodded slowly. He shrugged. "Just saying. You'll need more than practice. You'll need confidence." Before she could say anything, he turned and walked out. She stared at the doorway long after he was gone. It was the first time anyone at the academy had spoken to her without sarcasm. Confused her, but it also gave her a tiny spark of encouragement. The next day, the academy announced the annual piano competition. It was one of the biggest events of the year, attended by parents, teachers, judges from outside, and even some local musicians. Winning it could open doors. It could bring new opportunities, scholarships, and recognition. When the girl saw the announcement on the board, her heart thumped loudly. She wanted to enter, but doubt rose inside her like a quiet shadow. She remembered the laughter, the looks, the whispers. She remembered how out of place she felt in almost every class. What if she embarrassed herself in front of the whole academy? Yet something stronger than fear pushed her forward. She signed her name on the participant list. As she wrote it, her hand trembled lightly, but she didn't stop. When other students saw her name, their reactions were immediate. "She's entering?" someone whispered. With that skill, another said, she'll freeze on stage. She doesn't even have proper training. Their words felt sharp, like tiny cuts, but she didn't look up. She just walked away quietly, holding her schedule close to her chest. The days leading to the competition were intense. Every room echoed with music. Students practiced at every possible moment, polishing their performances, reviewing their techniques, discussing strategies with their private tutors. Some students had teachers who guided them carefully, correcting every detail. Others had earlier experience from competitions outside. The girl had no tutor. She had only her instructor's short advice, her determination, and the hours she carved out through pure effort. She stayed after school each day, practicing in the quiet halls until the last minute before the academy closed. When she went home, she continued practicing on her old keyboard. Even though its keys stuck sometimes, she used it to strengthen her fingers and memorize the parts she struggled with. Her mother would watch her rehearse late into the night, placing a warm cup of milk beside her and reminding her to take small breaks. One evening, after a long practice session at the academy, she stepped out of the room and found that same skilled student standing in the hallway again. This time he wasn't alone. 2 others were with him. They were talking quietly, but when they noticed her, they stopped. "So you're really entering the competition," one of them said. She nodded. The boy who had spoken to her before raised an eyebrow. "It won't be easy. Everyone is choosing advanced pieces. You're choosing something simple." "It's not simple," she said softly. "It's just the one I feel connected to." He studied her for a moment, then said, "Well, whatever you choose, make sure you play it like you believe in it." It wasn't encouragement exactly, but it also wasn't mockery. She accepted his words silently and walked past them. When she reached the bus stop that evening, she replayed their conversation in her mind. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her motivated. The next morning at the academy, one of the instructors announced that students would have open rehearsal time on the main stage throughout the week. Each participant would get a 20-minute slot to test the piano, the acoustics, and get a feel for performing in the large hall. When her turn came, she stepped onto the stage slowly. The hall looked enormous from up close. The seats stretched out like a sea, and the silence felt heavy. She placed her hands on the piano keys and began playing. Her hands shook at first, but she forced herself to focus on the sound, not the emptiness of the room. Halfway through her piece, she heard soft footsteps behind her. She kept playing but sensed someone walking closer. When she finished, she turned around and saw a small group of students watching her from the side. Some looked curious, others unimpressed. One girl whispered, "She's too soft. She won't stand out." Another said, "Her style is too emotional. Judges want precision." They didn't know she heard them, but their words stuck to her heart like heavy stones. As she walked off stage, she felt a mix of frustration and sadness. She didn't want to doubt herself, but it was hard not to. She wondered if she would ever be seen as more than the girl with the old keyboard case. Later that day, she sat alone in one of the empty practice rooms. She placed her hands on the keys but didn't play. Her mind was crowded with thoughts. Every whisper, every laugh, every comment she had overheard. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she remembered something her mother always said, "Don't let noise from others silence the music inside you." With those words echoing in her mind, she lifted her hands and began to play. Slowly at first, then stronger, like she was pouring out every emotion she had kept inside. As she played, she didn't notice that the door of the room had quietly opened. Someone stood watching her again, the same skilled boy from earlier. He didn't speak. He didn't smirk. He just listened, his expression softer than before. When she finished, he stepped inside and said quietly, "That was different. You play with feeling. Not many can do that." She didn't know how to respond. He added, "Just remember, competitions aren't only about speed or perfection. Sometimes they're about how much heart you put into it. Don't lose that." Then he walked away, leaving her with a strange mix of surprise and hope. As the competition day approached, she grew more nervous but also more determined. She practiced at dawn, during lunch breaks, after classes, and late at night at home. She poured everything she had into that one piece, believing that if she could just show the judges her heart, maybe, just maybe, they would see her differently. She didn't know what would happen on the day of the competition. She didn't know whether she would win, lose, or be forgotten among the other performers. But she did know one thing. She wouldn't walk onto that stage as the needy girl or the scholarship student. She would walk on as someone who had fought through doubts, whispers, and loneliness. Someone who had earned her place. And she would play like the world was finally ready to hear her story. The morning of the competition arrived with a quiet stillness that felt almost unreal. The girl woke up before the sun, long before her alarm rang. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds outside, the distant hum of traffic, a passing motorcycle, a bird chirping somewhere near the window. For a moment, she felt frozen between fear and hope. She had been dreaming of this day for weeks, but now that it had arrived, she didn't know what to feel. Her mother knocked softly and peered into the room. "You're up early," she said with a gentle smile. "I couldn't sleep," the girl whispered. Her mother walked in, sat beside her, and held her hands. "No matter what happens today, I'm proud of you. You worked harder than anyone I know." The girl nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She wanted to be brave, but her stomach twisted with nerves. She dressed in her simple outfit, freshly ironed by her mother the night before. It wasn't fancy, but it was neat, clean, and full of love. Her mother handed her a small lunch bag and walked her to the bus stop. Before she left, her mother hugged her tightly and said, "Play from your heart. That's all you need to do." At the academy, the atmosphere was completely different from a normal day. The hallways buzzed with excitement. Parents in elegant clothes walked around with their children. Teachers spoke in low voices, reminding students of posture, breathing, expression. The entire building felt alive with anticipation. The girl walked slowly through the hall, clutching her sheet music. She felt almost invisible among the confident students who stood in groups, laughing and discussing their pieces. The ones who had mocked her before now barely glanced her way, too focused on their own nerves. But she still noticed the occasional curious look, the raised eyebrows, the small smirks from those who doubted she belonged there. Her name was listed somewhere in the middle of the performance order. That gave her time, maybe too much time. She watched from the side as the competition began. Each performer walked onto the stage with confidence, bowed slowly, and played with polished skill. Some were incredibly technical. Others had speed and precision that amazed the audience. The judges sat at the front table with neutral expressions, writing notes after every performance. As she watched, anxiety washed over her. What if she couldn't match their skill? What if she forgot her notes? What if her fingers trembled too much? She stepped out of the hall for a moment to breathe. She leaned against a wall and closed her eyes. The sound of distant music drifted through the hallway, but she tried to shut it out. She needed to focus on herself, not the others. As she stood there, the skilled boy who had spoken to her before appeared. He was dressed neatly, looking calm in a way she wished she could. He paused when he saw her. "You look nervous," he said plainly. She nodded. "Everyone's so good. I don't know if I can do it." He looked at her quietly for a moment, then said, "You can. You just need to play the way you always do. You have something they don't." She looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He shrugged slightly. "They play perfectly. You play honestly. It's different." She didn't fully understand his words, but they settled inside her like a soft reassurance. Before she could thank him, he was called to the stage. She watched him walk away, hoping she could carry a little of his confidence with her. Minutes later, his performance echoed through the hall. It was strong, sharp, and controlled. Some students whispered that he might win. The girl listened from the hallway, feeling smaller with every passing second, but she also felt a strange warmth inside her. His words lingered in her mind. "You play honestly." Soon, the assistant announced her name. Her breath caught. Her hands grew cold. Her heart pounded so loudly that she thought people around her could hear it. She walked toward the stage slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The lights above the stage were brighter than she expected. When she reached the piano, she paused for a moment. From where she stood, the audience looked endless. Faces, shadows, rows upon rows of seats. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting, judging. She sat down on the bench and closed her eyes for a second, just long enough to steady her breath. She pictured her old keyboard at home, the chipped keys, her mother sitting behind her with gentle encouragement. She remembered the long nights of practice, the early mornings, the hurtful whispers she had ignored. All of it began to gather inside her like a quiet strength. She opened her eyes and placed her fingers on the keys. Then she began to play. First, her hands were slightly shaky. The first few notes quivered softly, but she kept going. With each passing measure, her nerves slowly settled. The familiar melody wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She forgot the audience. She forgot the judges. She forgot the students waiting backstage. She played the music the way she always did alone, in a way that felt honest. Her fingers moved with emotion, not showiness. The piece wasn't the loudest or the fastest or the most technically complex, but her playing carried something deeper, something raw, something that came from the hardships she had faced and the dreams she had held close even when no one believed in her. The hall fell silent, almost unbelievably silent. Even the students who had laughed at her before watched her now with stillness. They had expected her to be timid, small, uncertain. But on that stage, she was none of those things. She played with a sincerity that softened the air, something neither money nor privilege could teach. Her hands flowed across the keys with a grace she herself didn't know she had. The music rose and fell gently, filled with emotion that came from every wound, every hope, every moment she had doubted herself. When she reached the last note, it hung in the air like a fragile thread before fading into silence. She kept her head down for a moment, breathing softly, trying to come back to reality. Then she stood up slowly, unsure of what the audience thought. But then it happened. The applause began softly, just a few claps. Then it grew louder, then louder, until the whole hall was filled with sound. Some people stood. Some smiled. Even the judges exchanged looks that showed surprise. She stared at the audience, stunned. The applause wasn't polite or forced. It was genuine. It was warm. It felt like all the pain she had carried finally broke open into something bright. Among the crowd, she saw the skilled boy standing near the side, watching her with a small, approving nod. He didn't clap with showiness. Just a simple, respectful nod that said everything. As she walked off the stage, her legs felt weak. She wasn't sure if she had won or lost. But in that moment, it didn't matter. For the first time since she arrived at the academy, she felt seen. Not for her clothes, not for her old keyboard case, not for her background. She was seen for her music. And that alone felt like victory. Backstage, several students stared at her differently. Some were speechless. A few looked embarrassed. Others looked thoughtful, as if they had misjudged her all along. One girl who had mocked her before stepped aside quietly when the main hallway became crowded. She didn't say sorry, but her silence carried a small hint of regret. The girl wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about her mother, waiting at home, unaware of what had just happened. She imagined telling her everything. The applause, the moment the hall fell silent, the feeling that she had finally broken through something heavy and invisible. Whether she won the competition or not, she had changed something far more important. The way people saw her and the way she saw herself. Her performance had done something she never thought possible. It had shocked the very people who once doubted she even belonged in the academy. When the final note faded into the quiet hall, the girl stayed still for a moment, her hands lightly resting on the cold piano keys. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears, louder than anything else. For a few seconds, she didn't dare lift her head. She didn't know if she had done well enough. She didn't know if the audience had felt what she felt. She could only breathe and hope. Then she heard it, soft claps at first like someone trying to encourage others. A few more followed, and then suddenly the hall erupted with applause. It wasn't polite applause either. It was strong, loud, rising like a wave that crashed over the whole room. She lifted her head slowly and saw people standing. Some were smiling. Some looked surprised. Some looked like they had seen something they didn't expect from her. For a moment she was frozen, unsure if this was real or if she was just imagining it. But then she saw her teacher in the corner of the audience, wiping her eyes and clapping harder than anyone else. That was when the truth hit her. She had done it. Everything she had worked for had led to this moment, and she hadn't let herself down. When she finally stood up and bowed, she didn't feel nervous anymore. She felt free. She felt stronger than she had ever felt in her life. She walked off the stage with her hands trembling, but now it wasn't from fear. It was from joy. Backstage, she leaned against a wall and took a deep breath. She wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. She wanted to call home and tell her mother everything, but she needed to calm down first. Her chest felt tight, but in a good way, like her heart was trying to hold more happiness than it could handle. People soon began walking backstage. Some were students from the school. These were the same ones who had laughed at her clothes, whispered about her old keyboard, and joked that she didn't belong there. She expected them to ignore her, or maybe pretend they hadn't been rude earlier. Instead, they approached her slowly, almost awkwardly. Like they didn't know what to say. One of the girls who had mocked her the most stood there with wide eyes. She kept looking at the girl's hands as if she was trying to understand how someone from such a simple background could play like that. The girl didn't say anything at first. She just shifted from foot to foot, then took a deep breath and finally spoke. "I didn't know you could play like that," she said in a quiet voice. I never thought." She hesitated, clearly struggling. "I'm sorry for the things I said earlier." The girl didn't know how to respond. She had never expected an apology, and she wasn't even sure if she needed one. But hearing it felt like a weight lifting off her chest. She nodded gently, offering a small smile, and the other students relaxed a little. Soon more students came over. Some said she inspired them. Others said they wanted to learn how she played with so much emotion. A few even told her they hoped to hear her again. It all felt strange. Just hours ago, she was the outsider, the girl with old shoes and a second-hand bag. Now suddenly people saw her differently. They respected her. They admired her. And in that moment she realized something important. Talent didn't depend on money, clothes, or background. It came from the heart, from passion, from effort. A teacher approached her next, someone she barely knew because he usually worked with the advanced students. He had watched the performance from the front row. He smiled warmly and said, "That was remarkable. You have something rare, something people spend years trying to learn. Stay humble, but never doubt yourself again." His words replayed in her mind even after he walked away. Never doubt yourself again. She wished she could go back in time and tell that to her younger self, the girl who practiced on a worn-out keyboard in a noisy room, thinking no one would ever hear her. She was still taking everything in when a man in a suit approached her. She had seen him earlier with the judges, but she didn't know who he was. He introduced himself politely and told her he worked with a music foundation. She stood up straighter, unsure where this was going. "I've seen many young musicians over the years," he said gently. "But you have something very special. Talent is one thing, but the emotion you played with, that can't be taught. That comes from life, from struggle, from heart." He paused before adding, "We would like to offer you full support. Lessons, instruments, performance opportunities, everything you need to grow." Her breath caught. She stared at him without speaking. She almost thought she had heard him wrong. Full support? Opportunities? Lessons she had only dreamed of? A real piano? She looked down, overwhelmed. The offer felt like a doorway opening in front of her. A doorway she never thought she would reach. The man handed her a card and told her to talk with her teacher about the next steps. After he left, she sat down for a moment, burying her face in her hands. It was all too much, a good too much. She felt like she was floating. Later that evening, when she walked outside into the cool air, she held her bag close to her chest. Her teacher walked beside her, smiling proudly. They didn't speak for a while. They just felt the quiet, the peace after a storm. When they reached the bus stop, her teacher finally said, "You earned every bit of this. I'm proud of you." The girl looked at her with teary eyes. She whispered softly, "Thank you for believing in me." Her teacher shook her head gently and replied, "I only opened a door for you. You walked through it." When she got home, her mother was waiting at the door. She looked tired from work, but the moment she saw her daughter's expression, she knew something big had happened. The girl told her everything. How the crowd stood up, how the students apologized, how the foundation offered help. Her mother listened with her hand over her mouth, tears slowly streaming down her cheeks. She hugged her daughter tightly, whispering, "I always knew you had something special. I just hoped the world would see it too." They sat together for a long time, talking about the performance, about hopes for the future, about how far they had come. The small home, the worn kitchen, the peeling paint on the wall. It all felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because their hearts had. That night, the girl finally lay down to rest. But sleep didn't come right away. She kept replaying the moment her fingers touched the keys, the moment the crowd stood up, the moment everything changed. She remembered the long nights of practice, the times she wanted to give up, the voices that told her she didn't belong. Now she knew they were wrong. She belonged anywhere her passion took her. In the days that followed, she returned to school with new confidence. People treated her differently, but she stayed humble. She didn't care for fancy things or attention. She cared about music, about improving, about making her mother proud. She accepted the foundation's support and began her journey into the world of real training and real stages. And though the path ahead was still long, she walked it with her head held high, carrying the same old keyboard case she had always carried. It reminded her where she came from. It reminded her why she started. It reminded her that dreams didn't need perfect beginnings. They needed courage. Her story spread quietly through the school, then through the town, and eventually farther. People talked about the girl who came from so little, yet played like she had the whole world inside her. Some said she was proof that talent comes from unexpected places. Others said she was a reminder to never judge someone by what they have. But to her, it wasn't about being famous or proving anyone wrong. It was about doing what she loved and trusting herself, even when life seemed unfair. It was about holding on through storms until she finally found her sunrise. And that was how a girl who once practiced on a worn-out keyboard in a tiny room became someone whose music touched the hearts of the elite. Not because she was born into privilege, but because she refused to stop dreaming. Her journey had only just begun, and she knew it. She was ready, hopeful, grateful, and stronger than she had ever been. And she would never forget the night her piano performance changed everything.